Okay. So, um, I am here. My name is Jody Pugh. I'm here with my dad, Doug Pugh, Jackie Douglas Pugh, and 99.999% of the chance that if you watch this, you know who we are. But just in case you come across us someday and you don't know who we are, that's who we are. And we're just kind of going through some of our family history so we can get it logged so that there's some record that doesn't forever leave us as our family members are getting older and so forth. So our family name is Pugh, and so what we're going to do is we're just going to talk a little bit about what you know about the Pugh family leading up to, um, about the time that you were born, and then we'll pick up from there in other sessions. So, anyways, so I'll let you just kind of start, and you can tell a little bit about the Pugh history going back as far as you know. And you were telling me a few minutes ago before we started that you'd done some research back probably 40 or 50 years ago, and maybe you could even pick up with that.
Well, the Pughs were from Wales. They were coal miners many generations back, and they came from Wales. And I don't know the year, but they came from Wales as coal miners, and they settled eventually in Letcher County, Kentucky. They lived and worked all over Letcher County, Kentucky, different places. They moved around a lot.
And Letcher County, Kentucky is right on the southeast border of Virginia. If you don't know, it's right in the coal mine area of Appalachian, eastern Kentucky.
Yes, and they all from Paul Pugh, Calvin Pugh, uh, worked the coal mines. He got tired of it, and some of his relatives and Ma Pugh's relatives had moved to Menifee County. I don't know what years, but their last name were Backs, and they were relatives. And they spent the kids growing up. Uh, Most of them started work about 12 years old. Most of them on the outside of the coal mine, not inside, around the tipple or the actual coal pile as it was crushed and piled. That's where they started working, and most of them started about 12 years old. And then the rumors of war started. I would assume this would have been in the 20s, 1920s, but I'm not sure. So coal became critical, not just for lights and coal oil and things like that, but critical for the nation. And during all this time, some of the kids started getting tired of coal mining. So I don't know how this all started about, but they started, Paul Pugh moved to Menifee County, in Wellington, lived there. One of the boys, JP, lost an eye at the coal mine about 13 years old. So he got out and he went to Nashville mechanic school and learned to be a mechanic. And so he started the garage in Menifee County at Wellington. But my dad stayed in the coal mines, and they wouldn't let him. Well, I guess they could let him leave, but they wouldn't let him join the army. They wouldn't let him go in the military because his job within the mine was so critical for the war effort. And then in about I don't remember when they all bought farms in Menifee, somewhere around Wellington and Dan Ridge. And my parents bought a farm somewhere in about 19 and early 1940s, called a Lemon Wheeler Place. And that's where most of the kids, older kids, remembers that. I don't remember it because I was born in Letcher County and Coney, and the Coney coal camp. And then they moved with me to Menifee County full time because it was so hard for my dad to work in Letcher County and my mom to be in Menifee farming a 150-acre farm. So we moved down there, and then they sold that farm, bought a plot and cut the timber, built a house, and we moved into it in 1947, I believe. I was 2 years old.
So let me go back just for a minute, and just kind of catch up. So the Pughs are of Welsh descent, and I guess the were coal miners too, and then came over to Kentucky. Do you have any idea, like, was it the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s? Any idea of?
I did have that information, but I haven't been able to find it for 50 years probably.
And then another big thing, just to clarify, you talk about Calvin Pugh. So I just want to make sure to kind of clarify this. Calvin Pugh was known in the family as Pa Pugh, and that's your paternal grandfather. So,
Yes.
So your dad's dad was Pa Pugh and Ma Pugh. So Pa and Ma Pugh, and that was actually Calvin and Clementine, I think.
Yes.
Calvin and Clementine. So they were coal miners, and I believe, or he was a coal miner. Paul Pugh was initially, wasn't he?
Yes.
And then they had what, 4 boys and 1 girl. 4 boys and 1 girl.
Yep.
Okay. So the oldest boy was Irvin.
Yep.
And then who was next oldest?
I don't know if it's JP or Lucy. Might have been Lucy.
So you had,
I think it's Irvin, Lucy, JP, Hobart, my dad, and Homer. Homer was the baby.
And then at some point, the whole family left the coal mine area to go, 100 miles or so north to Menifee County, which is in the Natural Bridge, Red River Gorge area of Kentucky. And do you know, just in general, like, I know they wanted to get maybe out of coal mining, but how did they land in Menifee County?
I think it was because of kinfolk coming before them. They lived, the kinfolk lived on Dan Ridge, but we out at what was called the Big Woods at that time. It's all open and modern now, but it was just rough roads way back in the woods, basically, on top of the hill over Licking River. And they came and visited. I've heard many stories about them boys driving to Menifee County to squirrel hunt because the mountains were so big and bad in Letcher County, it's hard hunting. And they'd come and spend a week at a time with the backs camping out in the yard, basically. And sometimes it'd take 1 or 2 days to drive that trip from Letcher to Menifee, mainly because the roads were non-existent, basically. And they have to stop and fix a tire. they had to carry tires and tubes and patching and all that. And they might have 20 flat tires in a trip. So evidently they liked that country, which was all big timber back then. And I have to assume that's why they went there. But I do know they travel back and forth, especially the younger generation, often to visit kinfolk that was already on Dan Ridge.
So who was the first one that said, you know what, peace out on the coal mine business?
I don't know. I think it was Paul Pugh because he liked to move. Paul never liked. Now, JP told me all this. This is coming through JP. Paul Pugh never liked to stay in one place very long at a time.
He's a bit nomadic.
Yeah, he wanted to move. He's always on the move. And I'm going to guess it was him, but I don't know that.
So whenever they initially started moving, he got out of the coal mine. Did Irvin continue to mine, or what did he do whenever all this transition started?
No, Irvin got out of it. Irvin might have been the first one because he hated it. And he moved and had a farm, got a farm out behind Wellington. And he farmed for a few years, and then he actually went to Ohio and worked in I don't remember if it was a tire manufacturing or aluminum manufacturing plant till he retired. And he still farmed a little. We farmed this before my time, and then later when I was growing up, we farmed a lot of
Try to hold your phone a little still. It's kind of
okay. We farmed a little crop of tobacco, had a couple of cows, pigs, but we raised cane, made sorghum molasses. And my dad and Irvin both did that. I don't remember the rest of
it. To sell or to eat?
Oh yeah. Make 10 or 20 acres of it.
Yeah.
And sold most of it back up in Letcher County. I remember as a kid, they'd be making sorghum, and these people from Letcher County would come down in a pickup truck and buy truckloads of that. Well, he bought most of it. That's where most of it was sold. And it was store owners and the mine. I forget what they call that store, the coal miner store. Commissary. No, not commissary. Maybe they bought a lot of it, and we put it in 5-gallon cans, like lard cans, and then they would take it up there and they would divide it up in whatever they sold it as, quarts, pints, gallons, whatever. But I've seen them little old pickup trucks that would have been early 50s, maybe late 40s, and they'd build a box like racks around the truck, and they'd stack them full of them trucks.
Now, was sorghum is sorghum molasses? I guess it's the same. It's
same thing.
So we always I always heard it called sorghum, but when you hear it on TV, they always say molasses. So
yeah, same thing.
All right. So was that like a dessert, or was it like a staple food that kind of?
It was back during the Depression. It was a staple.
So it
was sugar. It was what the women baked with. You eat it with. It was a full breakfast meal with biscuits. It was and especially in the mountains, because they didn't have room to grow enough of what they needed.
Yeah.
And about the only place they could buy anything to eat was at the company store. But it was more a staple.
Yeah.
For them
But like
people
the
in the
young
mountains.
people that were watching, like my kids, have been to third world countries where they've seen extreme poverty, but they may not understand that when you were growing up, that was kind of like third world poverty in the way that you guys, to a degree, had to live, or some of the people back then had to live. It wasn't like they could go down to, get prime cuts of steak back in the 1920s in Eastern Kentucky from Costco. They had to live off of potatoes and bread and stuff like that.
Raise their own food for the most part. I mean, they were little stores around since I can remember, but it was tough during the war, and it was tough during the Depression, really tough. But that was before my time.
Yeah.
The war ended before I was born, and the Depression was before I was born. But the remnants of both of them went on through the 50s. And I remember the effects of a lot of it, but I don't remember the actual doing of it.
Well, I want to get back to the siblings there, but before I do, I'll just point this out. The war ended, I thought the war ended in June of 45. It was with the Japanese. I don't know. That'll be for the history person.
Well, you got two. You got to remember the two.
The European
remember
war ended in 44, I believe, and then Japan, everything.
Right.
Ended. So your name, everybody knows you now as Doug, but your name is Jackie Douglas. And that Douglas, you're named after who?
Douglas MacArthur, the general.
So Douglas MacArthur is a general that I believe led and I did not just refresh myself on this, but led the American troops in the Pacific to defeat.
Right, he was Pacific.
Japan. So you were born in March of 45, I believe, right before the war came to an end. I believe. So here's what's kind of interesting for me. So you're named after Douglas MacArthur. My name is Jody Douglas Pugh, and my son's name is Ethan Douglas Pugh. So a kid born in 2008, kind of through the things named after the general who led the war effort as you were born to. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But so Irvin, you told that story. Now Lucy, did she come to with Paul, and like she's the one sibling I know the least about of your dad. Did she end up coming to like where was she in this whole process?
I can't tell you this for a fact, but I think she married in Letcher County. She actually stayed in Letcher County a while. I think raised some kids up there. Some of their kids lived there. And then, and I don't remember what took them down to, I forget the name of the place they moved to, down around Cumberland Lake, down in there somewhere. I guess it got a job or something. I don't know. But I'm thinking she stayed in Letcher County longer than the rest of them.
Yeah. And then the next will be JP. JP lost his eye, and I guess he was done with coal mines after that, and came along about the same time. And then your dad, Hobart, he stayed in the coal mines. So he, but he moved his family when everybody else, I guess they all kind of migrated at the same time, but then he stayed in the coal mines during the week and came home on the weekends.
Yep.
So that had to be a terrible drive every weekend.
He drove it. I forget how long it took, but actually he liked coal mines. He liked working it, and is certified on everything in there. I mean, everything. electrician, welder, plumber. He was a certified everything. But his last years, and I posted a picture of one just like what he got hurt on Facebook here a while back. He was running a cutting machine, and the cutting machines, one of the machines is electric, great old big electric cord, and it had a big bar, maybe 15, 20 feet long, looked like a chainsaw bar, where you run that bar in that cold seam and then pull it back out. And then you either shoot the coal to make it come out or it falls out. Well, he pulled a cutting machine bar out of the cold seam of coal, and the roof caved in and fell on the bar and threw his end where he was sitting up against the roof, broke his neck and back. And then he never did mine after that. He went to the Pugh Brother garage after he got able. That's a few years. But when he went to sign up for the military, for the war, they rejected him because of his the critical nature of the coal industry for the war effort. In fact, I think they rejected them all except JP. They wouldn't take him because of his eye. But there's all still in the coal mine at that time.
And then Homer, the youngest of them, did he work in the coal mines, or did he come? Was he?
What I think there's another side of the story that is different than what I'm going to tell you.
Well, remember, you're calling me and whoever sees this video.
I know it. And but I always thought that Homer worked the outside. I didn't think Homer worked underground.
Yeah.
But now there's another story that says he did. So I don't know which is right.
Yeah. And so, but they all, again, going back, they all kind of came at the same time and left the coal mine at the same time, other than your dad who drove back and forth. Did they all leave at the same time?
I can't answer that for sure, but I think so. Yeah.
So here's what's really interesting. And you mentioned Pugh Brothers Garage. We're going to talk about that the next time, but there's in Menifee County, Kentucky, is the part of that area of Kentucky. Everything once you get it, like Frenchburg is the county seat, 700 people. It's very small, and it sits kind of down, I guess you'd say, in a valley. And then as you continue east, everything goes up on a ridge, and if you go all these roads, you're from Dan Ridge, and actually Mom is from Big Woods, which is the other side of Dan Ridge. Melanie, my wife, is from McCausey Ridge. Our cousin Richard lives on what, Bird Ridge or
Kendrick
Ridge, and there's all these ridges, and these ridges are where they go up on top of the ridge, and they build a road that winds around along with the ridge. And if you go to the right or the left, there's going to be a cliff you come across at some point, which is just kind of an interesting topographical point about that part of Kentucky. So you didn't grow up on Dan Road, you grew up on Dan Ridge, and and it's just a really interesting. So if you're from any other part of the country, that would be an interesting thing about coming to visit where you grew up. So everybody kind of left that area of the coal mines of Eastern Kentucky, hardcore Appalachian Eastern Kentucky. It came more towards the central part of the state and what would be probably considered the foothills of the Appalachian. It's culturally a little different. Menifee County, Letcher County today is culturally different. I've spent time for work in all over the state, and topography is different. And so when they went from Letcher County to Menifee County, like you said, they farmed sorghum and so forth. And then the family moved into this garage business. We'll catch up next time. But man, the next thing I was going to say, what I was going to say is, now there's another interesting part of this story of the Pugh legacy as it's gone from Wales into, um, Menifee County, Kentucky, mid 40s, early 40s or late 30s, whenever it was. And that is that there was an adoption within the family. And someone was a Burton and got adopted by a Pugh. And so if you were to go by our true bloodline, we're not really Pughs at all. We technically would have been Burtons had it not been for this adoption. So there's a story there. What's the story with that?
I wish I knew. The only thing I know for a fact, and that's from sitting and listening, and the Burtons side of the family used to come and visit every year, every summer. And that's what they did, sit on the porch and talk about those things. And I don't even know who those Burtons are now. I don't know if there's any living. And if they are, I wouldn't know where they are. I don't know. But Paul Pugh's parents evidently passed away. And his aunt, Pugh, adopted him or took him in. I don't even know if there was adoption back then. Took him in, raised him. And they gave him a choice. Now, this is my understanding. Do you want to go by the Pugh name or the Burton name? And he said, they're taking care of me. I'm going to go by the Pugh name. That is my understanding of that whole thing. And I don't know anything past that, actually.
So is is there a possibility that any of that is just, it's no tail, or is it like
no, it's fact. No, JP's told me that many times.
So Paul was actually born, what was his first name again? Calvin Burton.
Yes.
And so the Pughs were his aunt,
right,
married a Pugh.
And I don't know that connection. I just don't.
So we really aren't tied to the Pughs out of Wales. We're tied to the Burtons,
yes,
who are also Welsh.
Yes.
And so it's kind of the same story, even though it's Burtons. It's
the Burtons and Pugh in Wales back in those days, from what I understand, were back then. It's like it used to be here. Families settled in communities as a family. Like the Pughs on Dan Ridge, they settled close together. And that's the way I understand it was in Wales. You had the Pughs and Burtons all one family, basically, in a community, a coal mining community. So I can only, and it's been so long since I've looked it up, wouldn't know where to start now. But that's in my memory from back when I did some research on it.
Yeah. So the other thing I was going to mention is what's really interesting. This is where I lost my train of thought a moment ago. Is if you go back, why I started talking about ridges was this, and I completely lost my train of thought. If you go back, several years back, and you drive out Dan Ridge, you drive and you see, oh, there is a log house with black painted logs and thick white seams of uh, whatever the filler between the log and, I don't know, it's concrete or whatever. Um, and then you go, oh, there's another one. You drop, there's another one, and they all
Yeah.
look kind of the same. And those were the Pughs homes, and they didn't look like everybody else's homes. I don't guess. Maybe they did, but when I was a kid, they were the only homes that looked like that.
Yeah.
So what was the deal with that? That they built their homes like that, and versus
For the Pugh, and if other Pughs ever hear this, take it as it's meant. When a Pugh did something, I'm talking about 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s. When a Pugh did something, all Pughs did something. If a Pugh cut the timber off their property and built a log house, the other Pughs cut the timber off their property and built a log house. If a Pugh, like JP had always heard,
you moved from Letcher County to Menifee County, all the Pughs moved from
exactly. That's exactly. They were a community within their own family. And it was that way through that whole generation. And then I guess in my generation, it's gotten away from that a lot. Completely, probably. But back in the old days, if one Pugh got a television, all Pughs got a television. When the JP supposedly had the first one in the county. I don't know if that's true or not, but I always heard that. Well, it wasn't long until the rest of the Pughs had a television. It wasn't long at all. And that was a Pugh thing. That might have been a lot of people's thing back then.
Yeah,
because
part of the time.
Because every family did things together because they had to. Like Paul Pugh always raised hogs. Well, when they had a hog killing day, every one of them Pughs was there. Every one of them. Even me, and I had a little bitty toddler. And they all had a job. And he raised great old big killing hogs, and they'd kill 2 or 3 at a time when it'd be frost on the ground. And but they all done it together. And that's the way they did things. I guess the old, I don't know. Well, you had to survive.
Yeah.
One man couldn't kill 3 or 4 hogs for a whole family.
So one of the things that I guess is my sort of take, and I could be wrong on this, but just as I've kind of, because if anybody is watching this that doesn't know who we are and is just randomly watching this video. So you grew up there in Menifee County, but when you got married, and this will be a whole nother video, you moved to Louisville, Kentucky. That's where I grew up, but all my family's from Menifee County, and we spent a lot of time in Menifee County. So it's like a second home to me. So I had a window in, but just thinking how things would have been in my mind's eye when I think back to you were growing up, I think this is kind of how I see it. And I don't know if this is right or not, just curious. I see it like this family of Pughs moved in from the mountains to a culturally different Menifee County, and then they were just kind of different, like they built different homes, they did different business, they did like how much of that is accurate? Like they were just kind of they just kind of stood out a little bit in everything that they did back in the 1940s, or is that just my sort of dramatic interpretation of it?
Well, I'd never thought of it, but maybe because I remember when everybody in the county just about came to my dad to weld something because he's about the only welder there. And the garage was the garage in the county at the time. There's a couple more there, but that were busy too, but he was busy. I hadn't thought about the houses being different. There's a few other log houses that kind of depended on if there's pine trees growing where he's going to build a house, I guess, one thing. But those what you just said, I hadn't thought about that, but it's still that way. There's still a lot of migration out of eastern Kentucky coming to Menifee County and to Clark County, where I live now. A lot of migration. And a lot of those people have a different skill set, have a different mindset. And it's changing the complexion of the Menifee and Clark and everywhere. It's changing that complexion still. So probably you're right, and probably the people that came before them had some impact too.
But I broke into the Pughs family.
Uh,
I broke into the Pughs. They had to be there. Pughs married.
oh yeah, Joanne just pointing out there hadn't been a lot of Pughs marry in Menifee till me and her married.
Yeah. She was the first crazy one to marry a Pugh.
No, I don't think she's the first, but
And then a few years later, Melanie followed suit with me.
it was different. I mean, her family and our family is about the same, but it's different too. It's different for her when she married the Pughs. But they did go in a direction that hadn't been gone very often before when they moved there.
Yeah. So just to kind of summarize, we don't really know exactly when our Pugh Burton migration happened, but it came from Wales. Now, one thing I will say is what's really interesting, I grew up in Louisville. I was born in '69. Louisville's a very diverse city. But when you go to the part of the country where we're talking about in Eastern Kentucky, here's what's really interesting. In Menifee County, think about our family names: Pugh, Burton, Welsh. I think Conley was your mother's maiden name. Conley.
Yes.
English or Welsh or Irish or something.
Yeah, it's in that group.
Mom's maiden name's Brewer, which is English, and her other side of her family's Hamptons, which is English. Melanie's Conways, Spencers, Mackenzies, Farrells, all Irish, Scottish. That part of the country, this is really interesting, is 100%. You know, we have a cousin who was your sister married a Murphy. Like from that county, everything was within the British Isles, settled there, you know, from, which is really interesting. And our family name is all Welsh, and the family ended up as coal miners, as a coal miner family. And then I don't guess any of your grandfather or his brothers were in World War I or II, were they?
Not that I'm aware of.
Support, because coal fueled so much of the war. And then eventually around I guess early 1940s, they moved to Menifee County. Your dad continued to work in the coal mine until he broke his neck, and then came back. And then there's a whole nother start of history once they got into Menifee County. And then your dad's sister ended up, I believe, in Somerset, Pulaski County, and instead of Menifee County, but the rest of them all ended up in Menifee County. And so what we'll do is we'll talk about really the super interesting story about the Pugh Brothers garage. the next time. I'll say it's kind of funny. I'm wearing, because we're talking about Eastern Kentucky, my White Lightning T-shirt, which I just noticed as we're in here. White Lightning is another name for moonshine, which is not what this shirt's about. This is a roller coaster named White Lightning. So, that's why I have a White Lightning shirt on. It kind of goes appropriate with the moonshine area of Eastern Kentucky back in those days. So anyways, we'll follow. Is there anything else in this particular video that you think would be interesting just on this whole migration of Welsh miners into Kentucky?
I can't think of anything.
So, all right, we will shut this one down and then come back for another one to talk about Pugh Brothers Garage. So
Okay, that will work.